Where does borderline personality disorder come from? As a psychiatry intern, this is one of the most confusing questions to me. I would see tons of patients who had borderline personality disorder in their chart, but they were all so different. They had different stories, they had different backgrounds, they had different personalities. And I struggled to figure out exactly what was going on. That was until one of my teachers showed me this little cartoon that we used to explore with our patients how that condition might have come about for them. It started off with introducing the idea that people might have different levels of emotional sensitivity. There is research to back up the idea that depending on our genetics, we may show up as more or less responsive to our emotions and the emotions of people around us. While that can be a strength, it can also be a vulnerability depending on the environment we're growing up in. That's where the social story of borderline personality disorder comes in. Now, everyone's a little bit different, but one of the common types of stories that we would hear is of being in a very emotionally invalidating space. Not just consistently invalidating, inconsistently invalidating in different ways and across contexts, and I'll explain what that means. It is inherent in the nature of a child to seek emotional comfort from their parents. Now, as long as the parents get it right about 70% of the time, the child is able to develop an integrated sense of self and how a person relates to others. But when parents are explosive or dysregulated or respond to the same things different ways depending on their own moods in a massive way, when emotional disclosure is met in a punishing, disconfirming way, it can get really confusing for the developing mind and brain. Another way this pattern shows up is through being ignored. A child brings their emotion to mom or to dad, and you can think of it like a little candle. The child brings the candle and says, "Mom, Dad, a fire." Mom and dad say, "Don't worry about it." Child comes back, "Mom, Dad, a fire." They don't pay attention. Then the child comes back and says, "Mom, Dad, everything's on fire. I'm on fire. There's so much fire. I don't know what to do." And then mom and dad pay attention. Over time, if that pattern repeats, you can imagine that what the child learns is that everybody ignores me unless and until I am totally dysregulated. A person learns to stop with all the shades of gray in between. Either I'm dissociated, disconnected, detached, and ignoring myself, or I'm in 11 out of 10 crisis mode. Because in the one mode, I'm not being abused or invalidated, and in the other mode, I'm finally getting the attention that I deserve as a human being. This creates the pattern that is very common in borderline personality disorder of high emotional reactivity. People around an individual with borderline personality disorder who don't understand why that might be going on can experience this as someone having a very explosive temperament. But once you understand that, you realize that the issue isn't trait explosivity, it's how the person learned to survive their earliest environment. Now, because that person internally has to go from 0 to 60 in order to process emotions because that's what they were trained to do in that formative phase, that's where things like self-harm can come in. I've treated hundreds of patients with this condition, and one of the most common things I hear is that it gives them some sort of outlet or control. Now, this can be very dangerous and life-threatening, which is why one of the main treatments for borderline personality disorder, Dialectical Behavior Therapy, starts with establishing safer coping mechanisms. Because some of that deeper trauma processing work will make things worse before it gets better, and it's important to know how to stay safe throughout the turmoil of that healing work. Now, once I heard that kind of explanation, it was so much easier for me to empathize with my patients who had borderline personality disorder. I started to better understand many of the relationships I have in my own life, and it helped me be more empathetic. But I'm interested in what you think. If you or a loved one has borderline personality disorder, how do you explain it? How do you conceptualize it? And if you're involved in treating patients who have borderline personality disorder, what ways do you find to connect in a consistent way and create spaces where healing can happen? As always, I value the opportunity to learn from you and continue this important conversation in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one.